Hello gamers, Power Heal here, and today we're going to talk about the final installment of our little GDKP mini-series that we've done over the past 2 to 3 days. It probably won't be the final GDKP video we do on this channel, and if they announce within the next couple days that GDKP is coming to the Burning Crusade anniversary, we'll probably do more videos reacting to that, but for now I'm pretty happy and satisfied with the content we've put out over the past couple days. I think it basically kind of gets all my arguments out there, cover, different aspects, look at the situation from different angles. And overall, I'm pretty happy with things, but I just wanted to make one final video for now to kind of, go over some final thoughts I had, as well as kind of giving you a bit of my perspective and my kind of background with GDKP, because I feel like something that a lot of people assume whenever, the anti-GDKP argument pops up is that if you're making an anti-GDKP argument, you just haven't done GDKP before, you haven't participated. Because the idea is if you participated, you would know how amazing it is, and therefore you wouldn't be arguing against it. And I kind of get that logic because I think that, when you're somebody who really loves GDKP, you're looking at it from a pure personal benefit analysis for your character and yourself as a player. And it's very easy to just look at it in that way and be like, oh, look at all these amazing things that are happening for me and my character. So how could you dislike the system? It doesn't make any sense. Why are you trying to take this away from us? I think if you kind of broaden your look a little bit and think about how it affects the game overall as a whole, then you may come to slightly different conclusions. But like I said, it makes sense because if you're personally thinking about it from your perspective, the perspective of your friends who also do GDKP and things of that nature, then yeah, like why would somebody not want GDKP? And I think that last portion is a big deal too, with the idea that players who really enjoy GDKP tend to surround themselves with other players who are doing GDKP, because they may have a main guild raid or something of that nature, but if they're raiding on alts for GDKP or something like that, they're mostly doing it with a similar group of people. There may be some rotations in and out every week, but you tend to build these groups that kind of stay together over time, until people stop playing the game and things of that nature. So you're kind of surrounding yourself in a bubble just with tons of other people who, are pro GDKP. And I think it can be a little bit tough to kind of see past that and be like, well, why would anybody not want the system? Look at how much it's benefiting us. And yeah, I mean, they just assume that the reason must be because you haven't done GDKP before. That couldn't be further from the truth for me personally. I've participated in tons of GDKP over the years, because the way I see it is if you're going to have GDKP in the game, I'm not going to be left out of the kind of best, meta currency making system in the game. So I'm not going to protest in that way. But overall, I think it would be better if they didn't have it. I have a very similar argument about boosting, right? Where I'll make a boosting video very shortly on the channel, but to sum up my thoughts on boosting is I think it's terrible and shouldn't be in the game. But if you're going to have it in the game, then, I'm probably silly not to use it, because with the time I save getting a character to max level, I can do a lot more things on that character, not just in terms of progressing them quicker, but I can actually probably make back a lot of the gold, versus if I had to level them all that time, then, I'm not making gold during that time. So it's just an incredibly cost-efficient way to level characters as well, especially in things like Mara, where you can kind of get money back. But I digress. That's a little bit of a different topic. So I'm going to get into that and kind of my background in GDKP, because I think it's important for people to know that. And before I do that, though, I want to just thank everybody for, you guys have been watching and participating in the comment section. And it's been really cool. We've had record numbers of comments. I feel like at least for how many views the videos have, they haven't been getting a ton of views, but that's fine. I've been finding the, talking about it with you guys in the comments really fun. And most of you guys are arguing in pretty good faith, which I really appreciate. And I tend to match energy. So if I feel like if you're, coming at me polite and in good faith, even if I really disagree with you, and maybe a bit strident at times, but I'll try and maintain some manner of decor or civility. But then as soon as I get the bad faith people, man, I'm not afraid to argue on the internet. So you've probably seen a little bit of that in the comment section. I think one of the funniest ones that I've seen, just to highlight some of the absurd things, is that I was talking about one of the videos about GDKP, kind of promoting RMT a bit, and I'm not saying that all RMT stems from GDKP, but I'm just saying that it's an additional source of RMT promotion because it gives people a clearer goal of like, oh, I can go buy this piece of loot, if I spend money on G2G. And the argument was basically that, well, we'd have to remove professions if we want to be consistent. Right now, his argument wasn't to remove professions, but he was just saying that we have to remove professions in order to be consistent, so therefore you shouldn't remove GDKP either. You should have GDKP and professions in the game. But he was saying that because, you can make powerful things with professions like Lionheart Helm or, consumables like flasks and things of that nature that people need. These things all tempt people to RMT, as we've seen in the anniversary servers, and therefore, to be totally consistent, you would have to remove both things. And this is just absurd, obviously, because the thing that it doesn't understand, that he's not really getting, is that you can't destroy your game in order to prevent RMT completely. And other games have actually had some problems with this. There's actually a little game that my cousin and I played. It's still kind of in development. It's called Corepunk. And the developers, you can see they're very ideologically opposed to any type of RMT. And they've taken some very drastic measures to, ensure that RMT doesn't happen. And they've kind of had to walk a few of them back because it almost makes the game like impossible to play. Think of it as like if every Black Lotus that you picked in the world, that was bound to your character and you couldn't trade it at all. Okay. But then not only that, you needed not only Black Lotus, but you needed Black Lotus and then a mining material and then a logging material if this game had logging to craft your items. So, and you couldn't have all these professions max at the same time. So you would have to go and, do herbalism, get your lotus or whatever it's called. Then you'd have to do logging, get your blood sap, and then you'd have to do mining and get your like eternium ore or something like that it was. And then, you'd have to drop the profession each time, level the next one back up. And they basically made it like impossible to sort of RMT some of these materials, but the cost is just that there's basically no interactivity between the players at all, right? There's almost like no worthwhile trading. So you can definitely go too far on this angle, and that's kind of like what he's arguing, is that we've gone too far by banning GDKP. But the thing is that professions are a core part of any MMORPG, is my argument. So the idea is that, the fantasy of being able to go out into the world and, gather herbing mats to make alchemy potions or gathering ore to make weapons and armor, that's something that almost every player wants on some level. And it almost doesn't even matter how good the system is for the game, because tons of people are going to participate in it anyway. So a lot of us that are kind of like the min-maxer crowd, we look at a profession and we maybe see its value in terms of like, well, does this give us anything late game, right? How good is it late game? And if it's not that great late game, or if it can be outsourced in the case like blacksmithing, maybe we don't bother with it that much. But what people forget is that there's tons and tons of players that, even though these systems are imperfect and maybe not the best, they love the idea of kind of crafting their own stuff. And the example I gave in the comments was, even if there's like, 20k Timmies on the server back when it was in its heyday on the anniversary servers, that get tons of value and enjoyment about making this cool level 22 sword. It doesn't even matter if some of those guys quit at level 40 something, or if you have this guy that really loves the lore, he loves being an apothecary, right? That's his whole thing. And, it doesn't even have to be that deep. Like, you don't have to love it in that sense, but a lot of people like interacting with these systems to some degree. And as long as that's going to be the case, they're going to remain in the game, and they're core systems of the game. Whereas GDKP is kind of like more like fat you can trim. It's an external loot system added by people, but we don't need it to distribute loot in the game. And I would argue, and really even most people I think that are being serious would have to argue, that it's not the best loot system in the game. Even the people that love GDKP would have to admit that Loot Council is better. It really is just kind of the best pug system in the game for people who, always want to get something from a run, is sort of the idea, right? So it's definitely fat you can trim, in my opinion. Remember, this isn't really meant to be a solo game. It's meant to be played in guilds to begin with. So even having this system should be sort of redundant to begin with. It's an extra that we don't need. And, professions are a core part of the game. So even if they do, present the possibility for there to be a bit of damage done by them via temptation to RMT, we have to live with that ultimately. And you have to live with a certain amount of that in your game. And we don't have to live with the GDKP aspect because it's just completely extra and outside of the core of the game. So that's kind of my argument for that. I just thought that was funny. I wanted to bring that up to you guys. But let's get into my background a little bit because this is the main thing I wanted to talk about in the video. And I would say that I've done a lot of GDKP over the years. Like, honestly, a ton. In my GDKP, it started way before Classic. I mean, I feel like GDKP has really taken off during Classic in general, but I mean, I was doing GDKP back in Wrath of the Lich King, when it first came out and things of that nature, and eventually it seems like, I forget at what release, it really kind of hit the brick wall, but at some point people just started doing carries, and, I think also at that particular time, players weren't quite as good, so pugging some of the harder stuff in some of the later expansions that came after Lich King was a little bit more difficult. So I think that's when you also started to see it fall by the wayside. And pugging the highest end stuff now in current retail is obviously difficult, so you don't see as much there. That's why you see more carry opportunities. But I was doing GDKP all the way back then, and I did it in 2019 Classic. I did it in Psalm. There was a huge kind of GDKP scene in Psalm. It was probably like one of the most exclusive GDKP scenes that there's ever been. I've done GDKP in Season of Discovery. At the start, I was actually doing GDKP on like 8 or 9 characters. Wasn't really streaming at the time, I think, but I was doing a ton of GDKP back then. So yeah, I participated in more than my fair share of GDKPs, and let me tell you, like, I'm aware of the benefits, guys. Okay, I think that's like the main thing is everybody's like, how could you just not like the benefits? There's just so many benefits, and I want to stress that especially for the Classic portion of this, the benefits are insane. Now, when I was doing GDKP back in original Wrath of the Lich King, I played Death Knight, and one of the memories I have is going to GDKP on my Warrior alt, because Warriors is kind of the same situation where Warriors like scaled really well towards the end of the game in that version, so they weren't maybe quite as powerful as like vanilla Warriors early on, but by the time Ice Crown Citadel came around, they were really strong. So I had a Warrior alt that I liked to play around with, because at that point it was really strong, and I wanted like Deathbringer's Will and things of that nature, and I remember shelling out tons of gold at the time for Deathbringer's Will. But as a healer, you get an even better deal, right? Because the reality is there's almost no better place to be in a GDKP than a healer, because there's almost always a spot for you, because you almost always need healers, okay? You're probably getting at least a little bit of an additional cut. You're probably not getting like a double cut or something like that, but you're getting an additional cut. And they also have incredibly easy and stupid incentives like maximum healing or something like that, and top healing. And sometimes they'll even do like top 3 healing or something. These are bad in my opinion. I don't think that they're very good for the game, because they can cause people to play in ways that are not great. But regardless, they exist, and I've definitely taken advantage of them before in the past, because my mentality is that, if you're not going to ban the system, then I'm not going to deprive myself of it. I feel the same way about boosting, basically, right? Where I'm very anti-boosting, but if you're going to have boosting in the game, then I'm not going to deprive myself of the advantage it provides. So I participated in tons of GDKPs as a healer in Classic, and yeah, as a healer, it's the sweetest deal ever, because not only do you get essentially extra incentives, you get an incentive just for showing up as a healer, but also your gear tends to be incredibly cheap, right? So you're not shelling out like the big buku bucks for Deathbringer's Will. There's really none of that. You don't have to do that. I mean, there's things like Rejuvenation Gem, but even things like that go way lower than most of the other sought-after items in the run. And then on top of that, you don't even need good gear to participate in these, which is the kind of like the funny part, right? In SOM, there was one particular priest. I think I was rating on like 4 or 5 priests at one point in a druid in SOM. And these were like kind of the harder raids. Now, I'm not trying to say that they're like anywhere close to retail or anything like that. They weren't hard in that sense, but they were time consuming, right? Especially kind of organizing pugs. And you could definitely wipe in these raids. So I was doing a lot. I know like 5 to 6 characters doesn't sound like a lot for people that have, been doing other versions of the game, but this was a really annoying version of the game to kind of plug in at the time. And yeah, it had like 5 or 6 characters, and like 1 or 2 of the priests didn't even have 3 out of 8 tier 2, right? And you know, I was still performing just fine in those runs, still crushing it, still top healing, because ultimately you just don't need a lot of gear as a healer if you know how to play. You know, it helps, but so you can afford, like I was actually being super greedy because the prices on that server were so kind of weird that I just never really found a good time to buy the last piece of tier 2 for a price that I wanted. And you can afford to be really picky and stingy like that, which means that you get to take home like tons and tons of currency. Like I think at the start of that expansion, I had raw farmed like 20k gold or something like that. And then like not raw farmed as in like farmed it in strat or something, but like I got mats, I was selling stuff. So I ended up with like 20k gold, and that's around the time when the GKP started. And then that almost went to 60 like so fast, then 70, then 80. You know what I mean? Like just getting tons and tons of gold from GDKP. So I understand how lucrative this is. And, you know, my consumes were basically completely paid for during that period by GDKP. And I totally get, you know, kind of like the benefits. But the reality is that I'm trying to make with that by saying that is that I'm willing to slum it too, guys. You know, so I think people have this mentality of like, oh, this guy, he doesn't do GDKP. He's like this loser that, you know, is a noob at the game, and he just wants to ruin this great thing we all have going for us, right? And it's like, well, no, I've probably been one of the biggest beneficiaries of GDKP every time I play the game, right? Every time I play the game, I'm pretty well connected with people I know that run GDKPs, and I can get a spot like any time that I want, essentially. And, you know, probably on as many characters as I want, realistically. Like, I've had even people offering me to play characters for spots in GDKP and letting me keep the cuts, right? So I disproportionately benefit from this system, especially from knowing people from playing the game for quite a bit of time. So when I'm saying that I don't want GDKP in the game anymore, what I'm saying is I'm willing to slum it with the rest of the guys, like rest of you guys. Like, I know that it's harder now with all the bots and things of that nature to go out into the world and farm stuff. I mean, I haven't done a single GDKP. I haven't RMT'd anything in this version of the game. It's funny, I have a quick strike ring on this rogue, and when I got it from a soft res run, I was offered 30k gold to sell it. And I didn't sell it because, you know, I just didn't want to participate in that. Also, I think the person offering me the 30k would have been crazy, because probably would have been a really easy way to get both the accounts banned, especially with how they're doing, you know, they seem to be watching gold trades now more and more. But yeah, I'm totally willing to slum it with you guys. Like, I get that it's been hard, you know, like but I farmed every basically piece of consume that I've used in this game, and I find it fun. And even though it can be frustrating sometimes competing with the bots, guys, I get it, right? But I think there's something really cool about living in the scarcity too. And this is kind of a big reason too why I kind of stopped playing in the initial guild, because there was kind of a debate over whether we should be using flasks early on, because we all saw how the direction of flasks were going in the run, right? And you know, they were going up to like 400, 500 gold a flask for some types of flask. I think my flask was like 300 gold, the Distilled Wisdom. And we were doing split runs in this guild. And, you know, people were just so insistent that everybody had to use a flask, even in these non-speed runs. Like, speed runs, I totally get it. The whole idea is you're kind of going into the run, you want to use the maximum amount of consumables. So I'm always down to use the maximum amount of consumables in a speed run. But I'm thinking, like, why am I spending like 600 gold a week in phase 1 or whatever it was, or phase 1.5 or 2? I guess 2 is before Blackwing Lair, right? So I'm like, why am I spending like 600 gold a week? You know, when we're basically doing these splits for the warriors, because I'm going to get gear as a priest regardless, right? So we're basically doing these splits for the warriors. I'm basically spending 600 gold a week to, you know, farm other people gear. And I don't mind being in the raid and doing the raid, right? That's fun for me. But I don't want to spend 600 gold a week. And I had the gold, right? I think that's actually what annoyed them more. Is like, bro, you're like the farm, you farm all this gold. You're like the farm god. So like, why are you complaining? Like, we're the ones that should be complaining. I'm like, yeah, but because I farm the gold manually, I know the time investment it takes to farm it, right? So I don't want to waste it. It's kind of like anything else. Like if you make a resource yourself, you're more reluctant to waste it, and you're going to take better care of the resource, right? Because you have more investment in it. So all these people were basically like, yeah, like, why aren't you, like, you should be all for this. And I'm like, well, no, I don't want to just waste tons of gold. And I actually think that's kind of really cool, though, right? It's like you're breaking out the, like you're hitting the glass on the fire button for the things that really matter, like, oh, we got the speed run coming up. I'm going to break out all the stops. We got the wisdom flask. We've got tons of mana potions, tons of dark runes. You know what I mean? But to do this every week, it almost defeats the entire purpose of having the consumables to begin with, right? Because they're not special at that point. There's no, like, who even cares if you can go to a GDKP and you can just get enough gold to have full consumes on every character, then why are we even using consumes at all? And I made this argument in the last video, but I'll reiterate it here. And I'm going to make a video for the Classic Plus segment that I do, talking about how rare I think these things should be in Classic Plus. But yeah, I think they should be a bit rarer, right? Because you want there to be a weight in the decision you're choosing to make of, do I use a flask here? Do I not use a flask? Do I use a fire water? There might be things that you always use. Like on a rogue, I always use a mongoose. Because even though it's sort of expensive, it's just so good. So there's always going to be things. We made a video on this with healers where we talked about which consumes are kind of more worth it. I think that stuff is really fun to get into. And you don't really get any of that with GDKP, right? Because everybody is just, coming into the raid with every consume possible. It's like they're collecting all the Pokemon in the universe, and are just wanting to unleash them all at once when they get into a raid. And I think it's much more fun to have to really think about things and think about the decision making, think about how you're going to manage your gold over the long term of the game, right? And that's been kind of like a fun part for me playing Anniversary, because I can come and go whenever I want because of my gold making strategy, right? I don't necessarily have to farm the entire Anniversary. Like, I farmed a bunch at one point, I invested in certain things, and then now I'm able to kind of come back into the game whenever I want, and PvP, or if I want to do raids, I have the consumables for that. But this idea that you should just be using every consume all the time to the nth degree, I'm not really for it, And this basically is what caused me to end up kind of going into a more pug situation. And I want to make a couple notes about pugs too, and that's kind of what we'll end the video off on. And because most of the time, obviously, even if you do a guild GDKP, it is a very much pug environment. Like, we're talking about pug. It's like a pug loot system. Like, there's very few guilds that run off of GDKP where that's like their core. Now, like, even my guild, people would associate it as being a GDKP guild, but there is a main run in the guild that doesn't use GDKP, right? And then what they do is they host a bunch of other runs that would be GDKPs if you could in this version of the game, but are not currently GDKP. They're soft rose runs. But that's how it would go if the server did have that capability. And in these sort of pug runs, that's where GDKP really shines, right? Because the whole idea is that if you're in a guild run, you're kind of getting the benefit that people want with GDKP, because what people really like about it is the equity that you get in the server by getting additional gold, because you can then leverage that into getting items the next week, is the thought process. And you essentially get that from a guild just by your attendance and things of that nature, right? You're building reputation with them. But when you don't have that, then, and you're running pugs, people want some other system. And my thought about that, though, has always been, it's kind of just too bad, right? And I know you guys are probably thinking like, well, okay, that sounds hypocritical, but no, I live it in this version of the game. Like, I've been pugging ever since like Blackwing Lair on a couple characters, and those characters get no built-up equity. So I'm running with the same people, and they have a couple hard reserves and stuff, but that's for their tanks and things of that nature. And these guys like me, right? They love that I join their run every week to heal for them, but they weren't hard reserving stuff for me, and I would never demand to get hard reserve stuff, or anything of that nature. So there was no extra incentive for me to go to these runs. In other words, like, I was just going, I was competing with everybody else on the soft res. And if I won, I won. If I lost, I didn't. It took me forever to get Rejuvenation Gem. I could have easily not got it. I ended up kind of getting lucky, right? I got barely any loot out of AQ. I kind of lost all the roles that or not all of them, obviously, but I lost most of the important roles in AQ. And it didn't bother me. And I think some of them, they were actually getting worried because I was kind of like one of our, like pretty much our top healer, right? And our most consistent healer. And, like whenever I wouldn't win something, the guys would message me like, oh, sorry, man, something like that. And it's like, it's okay, dude. Like, I don't, it's not a big deal. I don't play the game for loot like that. I just play to have fun. Obviously, it's cool to get loot. You're trying to get loot, obviously, right? Because it makes your character stronger. That's always great. But if you don't get loot, it's not the end of the world. And I literally live that in the pug. So, I mean, I'm not telling you guys to do a soft res system when I'm over here in a guild getting kitted out because I'm like the best healer in the guild or something like that, and people are throwing loot at me. Like, that's not the situation. I've actually chosen to go into soft res runs just because I like the people that I'm playing with there. And I prefer them to some of the other people I was playing with. And it doesn't suit me as well, right? I would get more loot in a guild environment, especially because we're doing splits in the guild, We're not doing splits in the soft res run. But loot is just not the most important thing. And I just wanted to kind of make that known because I totally can get the feel of like, this guy is coming in here, he's talking about like, oh man, like remove GDKP, and it's just because like, he doesn't have to do this, right? So he's taking this away from us, and so easy for you to say, but I swear that's not the case, guys. If anybody's been watching my streams, I've been pugging the whole time, and if I don't get loot, we just, we kind of suck it up and move on. And sometimes it is that way. That's kind of how it's intended to be, is the final point I'm going to make, is that if you don't have the time to, consistently go to a guild run week in and week out, then realistically, it's just going to be harder for you to get gear, guys. That's going to be the reality. There's really nothing that's going to change that, and GDKP sort of changes it now, but the only reason like it's able to change it, like I talked about in the prior video, is because of all the RMT. If they were to remove all the RMT, you would have to go back into the world and farm match. You wouldn't get as much of a benefit. This idea that like you go into a raid and you get paid out, right, and you're getting something for your troubles, it wouldn't feel quite the same in a normal run, in a run without RMT, because you would basically just be covering your consume costs, and at that point, you're not building any equity towards items. Because if you're just covering your consume costs, then you're not putting aside anything in a week to save for items, and you might as well be in a guild at that point, right? Because then you're going to a raid, you're paying your consume cost like normal, but you're actually getting equity in the item system by, buying your consumes for that run, right? So you at least have a chance to progress towards gear, because I've heard from people in the comments, it's not about the gold, we just want to be able to get items. And it's like, well, in that case, you'd probably be better in a normal guild run. I understand that not everybody can be in a normal guild run. I understand that it's frustrating sometimes with the politics and things of that nature, but the game is meant to be played in a group communal environment. That's what Blizzard is trying to focus on, and that's why they don't really care about the pro-GDKP arguments. That's kind of why they removed GDKP to begin with from their terms. They didn't even talk about RMT, right? We made a video about that where we stated that from their perspective, they want you to build connections within a guild, and they want that to be sort of like sacred to you to a degree. They want you to try and protect that guild, to try and keep that guild going and keep that guild alive, because everybody in that guild has kind of like a shared, all their fates are intertwined. Like when the guild does well, everybody does well because everybody's equity is in that guild. And if that guild were to fall apart, now you lose all that equity, right? And it's a player friction mechanic is really what it is. And I think you guys that, you just really love GDKP because of how much it gives you, you're not really understanding the friction aspect of games and how sometimes it can be fun to go through a bit of struggle in adversity, right? Friction is absolutely okay. And whether that be the friction of not getting items in a pug, I realize that kind of stinks more. But really what Blizzard is trying to shepherd you into is a guild environment in some way. And there'll be friction in that guild environment. There might be loot drama, might be loot disputes. You might have players that are bad, not performing adequately. But that's part of the deal as a whole. And I think with Classic, the content is easy enough where there is friction, but it's not insurmountable friction. And I think if you guys would just, give that more of a chance, you might be surprised how much you like it, being in a guild environment like that and things of that nature. In retail or something like that, I can understand sometimes the friction can be really overwhelming if you're not in a good enough guild, right? Because at that point you can't even progress. But it's almost never going to be like that in Classic because the difficulty of the game is just way toned down. So yeah, I think a little bit of friction can be good. And, hey, if the friction is kind of too much, you can always just stop playing for a bit. That's what I did come Nax, right? I had this group of people. I liked playing with them. And I realized that after things kind of fell apart because people left and the group kind of split into two due to some loot drama, it was going to be really difficult to kind of revive the core of this group for Nax, And I was just like, I'm having fun playing other things right now. I just don't really feel like doing that in this particular period. Like I would probably have gone to the runs if we had a more complete roster, but I don't really feel like building from scratch. And I was upfront with that. I told the guys, and they don't hate me for that or anything, because everybody just wants to have fun at the end of the day, and like I said, the friction can be fun, but if it's not going to be fun for you in a particular moment, then, end that sub or something like that. Take a little bit of time off until you can get into a situation that you want in the game. Maybe the next release, TBC, maybe Classic Plus, maybe if they do another fresh server, or maybe if you're in a fresh cycle, just taking a couple weeks off from the game and then kind of coming back and reassessing, see what you're wanting. So yeah, like, I think friction can be good. You can always opt out if you feel like you don't want to do it anymore. It is a game after all, not a job. And it's always just going to be harder in a pug, guys. Like that's kind of the way it's meant to be. And Blizzard I think they made it pretty clear as of late that they are not going to go out of their way to cater to pugs, because the idea is that they're trying to build that communal experience. If anything, retail should be the version of the game that is more solo/pug friendly, right? I think that's why they have all the varying difficulties to try and cater to all these different skill levels. Whereas in Classic, the idea is that they want you to join a guild. They want there to be a community aspect there, and that's really what they're trying to foster, and that's at the core of, I think, why they removed GDKP and why we're not going to see it come back for the Burning Crusade. So thank you guys for watching. Just wanted to give you my perspective, kind of sum up some of the thoughts we've been going over the past couple days. I hope you've enjoyed it. And more content to come. That's probably not going to be GDKP. We're going to be talking about boosting, a bunch of other Classic Plus stuff. I have somebody made this. If you're into GDKP or just loot talk in general, there'll be a really interesting video coming out, because somebody had brought up the idea in the comments about a DKP system for the entire server. And I've thought about this a lot in the past, and I was going to make a video about it, but I was kind of waiting till I did the Classic Plus cycle, because I feel like if anything, it has a better chance to be implemented in that rather than just being, added into one of these, fresh anniversary cycles. So we're going to be talking about that, and I think that could be really cool. That might be more of what you guys are looking for. Could be an intermediary solution to some of these problems. But thanks for watching. If you like this, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys next time.